committee will come to order, a quorum being present. Good morning to everyone. Today we will be discussing new legislation I introduced this week to help raise awareness about concussions for student athletes and to improve students' well-being both on the field and in the classroom. Concussions have always been part of the conversation about student athletes, but for far too long, we've talked about what has happened without taking any action to help the students manage those dangerous injuries. When a student suffers a concussion, it's not just their athletic future that is at stake. Without proper management, their performance in the classroom is also in jeopardy. The student athlete needs to be much more about the student as the athlete. We simply can't talk about student athletes without really thinking about what brain injuries really mean for a student's future. In a concussion management arena, there is a saying, when in doubt, send it out. Unlike a broken leg or a bruise, concussions are not easily identified, but they're equally, if not more, dangerous. 90% of the concussions occur without a loss of consciousness, and many students simply do not know if they're injured. A prolonged diagnosis, when the pressure to play surpasses the need for treatment, can mean dangerous and harmful results to students. In the past 4 years, there were nearly 400,000 reported concussions in high school athletes, and experts believe the prevalence of sports-related concussions is much higher than reported. It is now commonly reported that 300,000 sports-related concussions occur annually, and once you factor in the recreation-related concussions, like those occurring on the playground, the number rises dramatically. We need to empower students to know when they may be at risk. Students deserve to know the signs and the symptoms and the risk of concussions so they'll be able to take appropriate next steps to prevent further injury and to prevent their successes in school from suffering. Student athletes with information about the symptoms of concussion are more likely to treat and manage their injuries. Many states have already taken action, but there is little regulation on the whole to ensure that the students in every state will have the same minimum protection. High school athletes are at greater risk of sports-related concussions than college or professional athletes because their younger brains are more susceptible to injury, and female youth athletes are even more likely to suffer concussions. The Protecting Student Athletes from Concussions Act will help improve concussion safety and management for student athletes by requiring school districts to develop and implement a standard, community-based plan for concussions and safety and management. It will require school districts to take 4 minimum steps. These will set a floor in the terms of what school districts will have to do. I'm confident that many states will far exceed these minimum expectations. First, similar to a plan in the NFL has implemented for the players, schools must post information about how to prevent and manage concussions for students to see. The information will be publicly visible on a school's website. Second, when a student who is suspected of sustaining the concussion during the school-sponsored athletic activity, he or she must be removed from the game, prohibited from returning to play that day, and evaluated by healthcare professionals, and parents must also be notified. And third, schools must provide support for students recovering from concussions and access to special education services for students who are not recovering. This is common sense legislation to protect our students. We may not fully understand the complexities of concussions, but we do know enough to improve the outcomes of student athletes now. Recent news reports about the prevalence and dangers of concussions have made it very clear that we will need to help prevent what we need to do to help prevent the injuries at all levels. The National Football League has already taken an important step to protect their athletes from the risk of concussions. At the very least, our schools should do the same. And I'd just like to interject here that it's not just about their athletes. One of the things we'll hear about this morning is really a program that the National Football League has entered into on behalf of all athletes, certainly playing the sport of football, but the impact is across all youth athletics, and also their work with the Center on Disease Control on working up educational, informational, public information programs on this issue. I think it's a very, very important partnership, both on behalf of this legislation and on behalf of working with states and school districts and parents about this danger. Let me go back and just say that athletics play an important role for student development. Team sports teach students about leadership, about teamwork, about commitment, and unfortunately the injuries are part of any team sport, and energy management should be a key component. But we have to do better for our students when they are hurt and need our most support. I hope my colleagues will join me in supporting this legislation. The bill is supported by leading groups representing teachers and parents, school administrators, the disability community, sports medicine, community medical organizations, and athletic organizations. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about why it is so urgent that we help protect our students from the risk of concussions and keep them informed and safe. Thank you very much for joining us, to all the witnesses. I'd like now to recognize Congressman Klein, the senior Republican on our committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to you and to all of our witnesses and guests here this morning. We're here today to look at the issue of concussions among high school athletes and the effects of these traumatic brain injuries on a student's academic achievement. This is the third in a series of hearings examining what policies and practices are in place to protect students from these injuries and help them safely recover when injuries do occur. Across the country, children are settling back into classes and school-related activities. The fall sports season is an especially familiar ritual for many, bringing parents, students, friends, and neighbors together to support their local teams. Over the years, we have learned a great deal about creating a safer field of play. Helmets, pads, and other safety equipment are now prerequisites. Coaches, umpires, and referees keep a watchful eye to prevent injuries. Yet despite all of these safety precautions, we know injuries do occur, including head and neck injuries that sometimes include concussions. Local policymakers, teachers, coaches, and parents must be well informed and empowered to help prevent concussions and take appropriate action when they do occur. We know that what happens on the field can directly affect what happens in the classroom. Academic research shows that student athletes who suffer from concussions tend to have lower attendance rates and lower grades than their peers, particularly when concussions are unrecognized and untreated. Such injuries can have long-term implications. As we learned at our hearing in May, states and local school districts are continuing to step up and address this issue directly. Today's hearing will continue to shed light on the research surrounding concussions among student athletes and what steps are being taken to prevent and properly treat these injuries. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Without objection, the committee is joined today by two additional members of the House who may participate in the hearing with questions and comments when recognized: Mr. Pascrell of New Jersey and Mr. McIntyre of North Carolina. Congressman Pascrell has been a leader on concussion treatment and prevention issues for school-aged children. He founded the Congressional Brain Injury Task Force in 2001 and has introduced the Contact Act. Congressman McIntyre is the co-chair and co-founder of the Congressional Caucus on Youth Sports and is hosting a forum on this subject, both for members and staff, I believe, and a lunch later this afternoon. So people should be advised of that. Thank you for joining us, Michael, and for your leadership on this issue. Our panel today, I think, will be very helpful to all of the members to gain additional knowledge of this issue, but also, importantly, hear from the victims of concussion, but also people who are working in partnership to develop programs for the diagnosis and the protection and the recovery of individuals who suffer concussions in youth sports. Our first witness will be Dr. Gerald Gioia, who is the Director of Pediatric Neuropsychology, Psychology program at Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C. He also oversees the hospital's Safe Concussion Outcome and Recovery and Education program, the SCORE program, where he evaluates and treats youth who have sustained concussions. Dr. Gioia has conducted extensive research on how to care for young athletes recovering from concussion and how the injury affects learning. Allison Conga-Chang is a senior at Centennial High School in Endicott City, Maryland. Ms. Conga-Chang is an active member of her community, an honor student, editor of the school newspaper, The Wingspan, and an avid soccer player. Allison is recovering from her first concussion, which she sustained during soccer practice this past August. She's still experiencing cognitive impairments as a result of her injury, including problems with concentration and memory, headaches, and sleep difficulties. Reverend Kathleen Brealey is the pastor of Long Swamp United Church of Christ and is the mother of the late Owen Thomas. Her son Owen played football from age 9. He was 21 years old, a lineman at the University of Pennsylvania, when he committed suicide this past April. Owen was never diagnosed with a concussion, but his autopsy revealed early stages of a disease caused by repetitive brain injury. That is the very same disease found to be primarily in professional football players who have committed suicide over the last 10 years. Sean Murray is a retired NFL player. He played for 4 NFL teams on special teams as a wide receiver over the past 10 years. Mr. Murray, who graduated with honors from Brown University, was selected as the Ivy League Rookie of the Year and Player of the Year and is second-team All-American. Mr. Murray was drafted 7th round in the 1999 NFL Draft and later was selected to be captain of the Super Bowl 40 champion Pittsburgh Steelers. Sean is also a Pro Bowl special teams player. In the past August, just before the starting of training camp, Mr. Murray retired due to post-concussion syndrome. Dr. Stanley Herring is this board-certified physical medicine and rehabilitation specialist who's been in practice over 28 years. Dr. Herring is a clinical professor in the Department of Rehabilitative Medicine, Orthopedics and Sports Medicine, and Neurological Surgery at the University of Washington, co-medical director of the Seattle Sports Concussion Program. Dr. Herring also serves as one of the team's physicians for the Seattle Seahawks and for the Seattle Mariners. He is a member of the NFL Head, Neck, and Spine Committee and chairman of the Education Advocacy Subcommittee and serves as a concussion expert on the Football and Wellness Committee of USA Football. Welcome. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise that you're going to share with the committee this morning. For those of you who this is a first-time experience, in front of you there's a small box. It will when you begin testifying, a green light will go on. You will then have 5 minutes to present your thoughts to the committee. With 1 minute remaining, an orange light will go on. So if you can think about wrapping up your remarks, but we want you to make sure that you deliver your full thoughts to the committee. It's a rather limited amount of time, but we want to also make time for questions from the members of the committee. And Dr. Joya, we're going to begin with you. So we'll begin with you, Dr. Joya. Again, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman Miller and members of the committee, and thank you for the opportunity to speak again on today's important topic. Today we continue our focus on concussion, a type of traumatic brain injury, and its negative effects on the academic learning and performance of the student athlete. Learning in school is the child's job, and that job is impaired after a concussion. The consequences of a concussion can be significant for the academic learning and performance of that student athlete. Our current research finds adverse effects of this injury upon school learning of up to or close to 90% of the students that come to us in our clinic. They report a significant worsening of post-concussion symptoms when they attempt school tasks. But the effects of concussion are quite significant and can be quite wide-ranging, with an adverse effect on their ability to think and to learn and for their social and emotional functioning. The student also typically experiences physical pain with headaches and significant fatigue. These symptoms can be debilitating and disabling for a child's learning and their social interactions. The length of time to a full recovery following a concussion and of that functional impairment varies from days to months, and for some, even beyond that. Academic problems can also have significant downstream effects, especially for the high school student. For example, concussions at the end of a semester significantly reduce performance and grades on final exams, reducing the student's grade point average. Taking an SAT prior to recovery from a concussion can also have significant adverse impact on that student athlete's college future. Are our schools currently prepared to handle the academic consequences of these injuries? Through our clinical work, we can clearly see that schools are very much caring and want to help students with these injuries. But they're often not adequately prepared to help them. They lack the necessary policies, procedures, knowledge, skills, and tools to properly support the return of the concussed student athlete. In a survey we conducted this summer of 140 school nurses in the Washington, D.C. area, they reported that less than half of the schools were prepared to assess a concussion, and less than 1/3 were prepared to offer academic supports after the injury. Training with the new CDC Heads Up to Schools Know Your Concussion ABCs toolkit was very effective, though, in increasing that knowledge of the injury and ways to assess and to treat it. So how can we help students with concussions return to school? We know that these students typically do not meet the criteria for special education services, yet they're still not able to handle the normal academic learning and performance demands. And the reality is that the school learning environment places significant physiologic demands on that recovering brain. The effective management of these adverse academic effects is an important priority, and we have to provide effective supports that maximize the student's recovery and minimizes any long-term post-concussion problems. The Protecting Student Athletes from Concussions Act that was introduced yesterday provides an important vehicle to improve care systems for students with concussions. This legislation places the focus directly on the student side of the student-athlete equation. It places the focus on supporting the academic learning and performance needs of that student-athlete after this injury. It focuses on what schools can actually do to support the academic return of that recovering student. So this legislation asks schools to, number one, develop policies and methods to implement concussion education and training of school and related persons, including parents, students, and coaches. Number two, it provides a range of academic supports to help those students as they're attempting to manage school. And third, it reinforces, through its response to concussion elements, the sport removal provisions of the Zurich Consensus Meeting and what we've seen in some of the laws, such as the Leistet Law. It also reinforces the need for appropriate evaluation to return the student-athlete back to the field and to the classroom to support their academic needs. So in conclusion, a concussion is a serious injury to the brain that presents significant risks and challenges to the academic performance and learning of the student. It negatively affects the primary job that they have. These academic problems, even if temporary, can have significant potential negative consequences for the student down the road. And if not treated properly, these academic problems can become prolonged and result in significant long-term difficulties for that student. We must assist our schools to become better prepared to properly support the return of the concussed student-athlete with the necessary systems put in place to improve the knowledge and the skill of our school personnel. The Protecting Student Athletes from Concussions Act does this, seeking to develop and implement a national system of concussion education, protections, and academic supports for students with concussions. Now, this legislation promotes more effective recovery, and it will help return our students back to the schools effectively. Next, you're going to hear from Allison, who will tell you about her injury and its challenges just in this way. Thank you.
Thank you. Allison, welcome to the committee, and go ahead and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Allison Concussions. I'm a 17-year-old high school senior at Centennial High in Ellicott City. I'm an honors student, editor of my school newspaper, and an active volunteer in my community. I also love reading and hanging out with my friends. I would say I'm a pretty typical teenager. I've been playing soccer my whole life, almost as soon as I could walk. This year was going to be my 4th year as a high school soccer player. Until recently, I was hoping to play Division III soccer in college. I was really looking forward to my senior season. But circumstances changed when I suffered a concussion on Friday, August the 20th. Practice was almost over, and I was playing central midfield on an 11 versus 11 scrimmage. I jumped up to head an approaching corner kick with the right side of my head. I don't remember anything that followed. I was told later that my friend and teammate, Lauren, had also gone up for the ball, and we had collided. Judging from the bruise I found later up and down the right side of my thigh, I assume I landed on that side of my body and that I hit the ground hard. The next thing I remember is sitting up unsteadily to see my teammates huddling concernedly around me. My vision had gone very blurry, and I had severe tunnel vision for several seconds. Everything was black around the edges. I was helped off the field, and soon my vision cleared a bit. I sat out the rest of practice that day. Immediately after the concussion, and for the rest of the day, I discovered that I was having severe balance problems. Even with the slightest nudge, it was a struggle not to fall down. I also had a lingering headache, as well as fairly constant dizziness. Later that day, my boyfriend said I seemed fairly dazed and confused, and I noticed that my mind often drifted from the conversation or situation. I just felt very out of it. It's hard to explain if you've never experienced it before. I arrived at the school the next morning for my scrimmage and was given some preliminary tests by my school's athletic trainer. I was told I had to see a doctor and either be diagnosed with a concussion or cleared. After a week of confusion with paperwork and forms, I was seen by my family doctor, who cleared me to play. Meanwhile, school had started and I was anxious to play. I thought I had fully recovered. The only thing standing in my way of the playing field was a computerized test. Before the start of the season, all athletes at my school are required to take a baseline concussion test. It is a half-hour test that evaluates basic cognitive functioning by measuring memory and reaction time. Remember the word, click when you see the green light, so on. About 2 weeks after I suffered the concussion, I took the test to see if I was functioning normally. I could tell that I didn't do very well, and I wasn't surprised when I was called back to the trainer to take the test a second time. Again, I knew I had done poorly. I just couldn't remember the words they were asking, or the patterns and the numbers. My trainer told me my test results were, quote, inconsistent, with some test results significantly below my baseline data. Around this time, I also started to notice other symptoms. The headaches lingered, and I began to forget things, not just day to day, but morning to evening, or even moment to moment. My sleeping patterns changed. I slept more, feeling constantly tired, yet I had trouble falling asleep, a problem I had never had in the past. School became more difficult once we started to delve into more complicated subjects. About 45 minutes into my hour-long class periods, my concentration would be completely gone, and I would develop a splitting headache. This has been a problem for me as I'm taking 5 advanced placement classes this year. Reading textbooks and articles for homework was particularly difficult. It would take me twice as long, and it would be a constant battle with my concentration. Because of my inconsistent test results and reappearing symptoms, I was sent to Dr. Joya. He ran several more tests on me, and my results were still subpar. After a full examination, he explained that I was still actively in the recovery stage, and that my headaches and concentration troubles were indications that I was overtaxing my brain. I was going to have to pay special attention, and any time a headache came on or my attention flagged substantially, I had to take a break and cool off. Homework would have to be limited to 30 minutes at a time with 10-minute breaks. Dr. Joya wrote up a care plan for me that I brought into school. The school and my teachers have been extremely understanding and accommodating. Whenever I need to cool off my brain, I can go to the nurse's office, and I've gotten extensions on reading assignments. These adjustments have helped, but with the added time it takes to do my homework and the mandated breaks, schoolwork now dominates my evenings and weekends. I'm glad to say that I'm feeling better and making progress. I appreciate the support I've received from my family, friends, and the best high school in America, Centennial. I'm grateful that my school had a system in place to identify the severity of my injury and point me towards the medical care I've required. I'm glad the committee is focusing attention on the issue. I have seen how it has impacted my life, and I worry about the student athletes who don't get properly diagnosed and fall through the cracks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to recognize also Sarah Rainey, who was in the audience, who is a previous witness to this committee, and I believe will be participating in the forum this afternoon that Mr. McIntyre and the Sports Caucus, Youth Sports Caucus is hosting. Raise your hands so the members can see you, Sarah. Good to see you. Thank you. Reverend Brealey?
Thank you. My son Owen would cringe at the thought of being the center of so much attention today. Although an excellent wordsmith, Owen would adhere to the unspoken football rule that words are used sparingly. In that ancient motif of oratory Athens versus warrior Sparta, today Owen would stand with Sparta. Today I speak only for myself, and I do not even speak as an expert on football, a sport about which I learned only when I came to the United States in 1982. Nevertheless, I have thought deeply about the cultural role that football plays in the United States. My first purpose is to put a human face on the disease called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE. On April the 26th, 2010, my son Owen Thomas, age 21, a football player at the University of Pennsylvania in the Wharton School of Business, committed suicide on a dreary, rainy Monday afternoon. Friends and family were deeply shocked, as Owen seemed the most unlikely person to commit suicide. Subsequent detailed analysis of Owen's brain tissue revealed that he had the onset of CTE in the frontal part of his brain. Owen's untimely death generates a new set of questions to be addressed by CTE research. He had no known concussions at any time when playing soccer, basketball, baseball, or football. To our knowledge, Owen never used steroids or abused drugs or alcohol. He had no history of depression. We have no family history of depression or dementia. Owen never complained of headaches or acted strangely. The only explanation for the presence of CTE is that Owen started to play football at the age of 9. He was a very physical and intense player who threw himself into every sport he played. In pre-college football, he often played offense and defense and was on the field for much of the game. Maybe he had mild concussions that he never reported. Now that will be Owen anxious to return to the game, not a coach pressurizing him. Or maybe CTE is the cumulative effect of multiple subconcussions, compounded by some as yet unknown genetic component. We now know Owen, the recipient of his high school's Eisenhower Award for Leadership, faced an increasingly circumscribed future as his brain disease progressed. We would surely have loved and supported him no matter what the cost, but the bright future to which he aspired would have eluded him. Since learning that Owen suffered from CTE, I have become more aware of the many facets of this problem and the immense human sorrow that lies behind the loss of young lives. In the bitterness of grief, it is hard not to be angry that the Philadelphia Medical Examiner did not preserve Owen's brain as a complete entity, or ask me if I wanted it kept separate in case it was needed for research. Clearly, changes are needed in the medical community as well as the sports community. We have to consider that if only 1% of students who play contact sports starting at a young age, if only 1% of those students have CTE, that will be a large public health cost to this nation, which is a concern for all of us. I know that high schools that are concerned about their budgets surely do not want to have lawsuits associated with this, and parents and coaches also are anxious for their youth to be safe in school sports. Congress, this is a very widespread problem, and I appreciate the interest of Congress in this, and I think that Congress can use their goodwill, their good offices, to promote widespread discussion of this very difficult situation. When we think about football, I think it's important for us to think that many of these, that football is not a sport in which most people put out their emotions for people to see. If we think about Steelers coach Bill Cowher, he was an unusual person to put out his demonstrative, terrible towel, jutting out jaw drama on the sidelines. Much more common is that stoic, taciturn demeanor of the late Tom Landry. And so football is not a sport in which most players or coaches bring forth their emotions. Nevertheless, those emotions are very intense and should not be dismissed. So I think we come back to this ancient motif of what it means for people to be like Spartan. It does not mean that they're ignorant or stupid. It does not mean they don't have strong feelings. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Morey?
Good morning, Chairman Miller and members of the Education and Labor Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important discussion addressing the health risks of concussion in youth and high school athletics. My name is Sean Morey. I serve as a co-chair of the NFL Players Association Mackey White Traumatic Brain Injury Committee, along with our medical director, Dr. Tom Mayer. I also serve as a member of the NFLPA Executive Committee and our Player Safety and Welfare Committee. For over the past decade, I've lived my dream of playing in the National Football League. I've always felt that the true privilege of being a professional athlete was the ability to reach and impact the lives of our youth in a profound and positive way. I took advantage of talking to student athletes many times to instill confidence and encourage them to raise their expectations both in school and in life. I'm here today to issue a different message, one of concern for their health and safety. The science of brain trauma is advancing rapidly. The short and long-term effects of acute symptomatic concussion and repetitive brain trauma are serious public health concerns. I applaud the work of Chairman Miller and his colleagues to address this issue in an attempt to educate and protect our youth athletes and make sports like football safer. The game of football has enriched my life, and I believe we must all play an active role to preserve the integrity of the game we love so dearly. In response to the growing concern of brain trauma in our game, the NFL Players Association formed the Mackey White TBI Committee last season to commission leading neurological and medical experts to interpret the science support independent research, educate players, and make progressive changes in our game to advocate for the health, safety, and welfare of active and former NFL players. I'd like to recognize and thank the members of our Mackey White Committee and the NFL Head, Neck, and Spine Committee for working together to educate and protect NFL players. We realize our efforts to manage concussions properly in our game can help protect many other athletes. Football is a profession I've chosen. I chose to risk my health to financially provide for my family, not unlike policemen, firefighters, or members of the military. However, our children's developing brain is far more sensitive to chemical and metabolic changes of concussion. In addition, we must realize that kids don't have a team of medical professionals on the sideline every day like I did, which is why we must support a bill like Protecting Student Athletes from Concussion Act to educate coaches, parents, and student athletes on how to identify concussions and get our kids proper care so they don't suffer additional and completely unnecessary secondary injury. Our brain is the most vital organ in our body. The NFLPA, NFL, and Centers for the Disease Control have worked together recently to provide information that reflects scientific consensus about the short and long-term risks of concussion. These risks can include problems with memory and communication, personality changes, as well as depression and the early onset of dementia. When a player sustains a concussion, there's a period of vulnerability where another impact can kill injured brain cells which could have otherwise recovered. Proper diagnosis and treatment is the key to recovery and safe return to play. As NFL players, you recognize we serve as a model for millions of youth, high school, and collegiate athletes. The most profound impact we can have on these athletes is to set a better example and encourage them to be honest with their team medical staffs, coaches, and teammates about their brain injuries and take the necessary time to recover. My experience in the NFL has been incredibly fulfilling. I've played in every NFL stadium in over 200 games, including 3 seasons in NFL Europe, a World Bowl, 17 playoff games, 5 conference championships, 2 Super Bowls, and a Pro Bowl. I was selected to Peter King's All-Decade team as his special teams player, but I've also suffered more concussions than I care to admit. I've learned repetitive brain trauma, especially when there is inadequate time to recover, may cause permanent damage to our brain. I understand the pressures we put on ourselves to play hurt. We all share a deep loyalty to our team to fight through pain and finish the game. However, athletes need to disregard the warrior mentality when addressing brain injuries. Several independent neurological experts recommended that I retire from professional football due to post-concussion symptoms. On the eve of my 12th NFL training camp, I disclosed what the doctors told me, and I had to walk away from the game. I didn't want to have to change the way I played, take a roster spot from somebody else, or become a liability to my team or family. I took it as far as I could. I made the right call for the good of the team, my family, and my own personal health. NFL players today are working to change the culture in our locker rooms and on the field to manage concussions properly in our game. By raising awareness and protecting student athletes, we leave an enduring legacy that will impact the lives of others for decades to come. The game of football teaches us to value selflessness, accountability, leadership, and above all, teamwork. Let's continue to work together to change the culture about sports-related concussion. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this process to create real, meaningful, and productive change, protecting our youth athletes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Herring.
Thank you, Chairman Miller and Ranking Member Klein and the members of the committee and guests. Mr. Chairman, today you should have received a letter from Commissioner Roger Goodell of the National Football League supporting your legislation, and I know that his letter says that the NFL is grateful for the opportunity to work closely with you in developing this important legislation, which will further our shared goals of increasing concussion awareness and preventing these injuries among our youngest athletes, not only in football, but in all sports. And as a member of the newly formed NFL Head, Neck, and Spine Committee, I join the Commissioner in thanking you for this work as someone who has spent his life managing athletes with sports concussions. This Protecting Student Athletes from Concussion Act is really a significant step forward. It's a great campaign to protect young athletes, and as a physician, educator, advocate, and representing the NFL today, I am proud to testify after many years of work in this area. I would take a little different bent today and make my testimony a bit more personal. I'm sure the committee has heard of the name Zachary Lystet by now. In October 2006, Zach was a 13-year-old middle school all-star football player who suffered a blow to his head with a few minutes left in the first half. There was an injury timeout. After halftime, Zach returned to play. He was still having symptoms from his concussion. He sustained further head blows in the second half of the game. At the end, the game collapsed in his father's arms, lapsed into a coma, and suffered life-threatening injuries. Zach survived, but he is now faced with a lifelong road of rehabilitation. The tragedy here, Mr. Chairman, is that was a preventable injury. A coalition of brain injury advocates and doctors and athletic trainers, school administrators, risk managers, and local elected officials in the state of Washington began to work on a law to prevent the next child and the next family from suffering the way Zachary and his family did, the Zachary Lystet Law. It was during this process that I personally met Zach. I take care of the Seahawks. I'm on the sideline at a practice, and here's a young boy in a wheelchair with his parents. And Zach looks at me straight in the eye, and he very slowly and deliberately says, because he's just learning to read talk, the reason I'm here, he said, is to help people. And I have to tell you, as a doctor who takes care of people with disability, that was a pretty powerful message from a young man who couldn't speak for 9 months, almost lost his life, and has had to work incredibly hard just to get some sense of normalcy. It's a pretty incredible statement. And Zach had choices during his recovery. He could be angry, or he could be content, or he could be depressed, or he could come to accept it, or he could be bitter, or try to find peace. And each choice made that young man who he is today, this incredibly witty and driven and fabulous 17-year-old young man who still struggles with significant problems, and his family struggles along with him. But they really are changing the face of youth sports across this country. The coalition in the state of Washington passed the Lystet Law, and it had 3 essential components, very similar to what's in your bill, and we praise you for that. 7 more states have passed Lystet Law since that time, and it's pretty easy. Educate parents and athletes, coaches and administrators. If there's a suspected concussion, take the youth athlete out at that time. And the third piece, don't put them back in until they've been cleared by a licensed health care provider who understands concussions. Mr. Chairman, if your bill was to become law, it would protect athletes in every state that don't yet have a Zachary Lystet Law. Now, Commissioner Goodell has already given you the NFL's pledge to work diligently in support of your legislation. And at the same time, Mr. Chairman, we are engaged in a state-by-state effort to pass Zach Law. We would hope to see legislation in California. And just this week, I'm very pleased to announce that a bill was introduced here in Washington, D.C., the Zachary Lystet Law. Also, as part of our state-by-state effort, the NFL will convene an educational and advocacy summit next month in my hometown of Seattle, a how-to course for the Zachary Lystet Law, and that will be available online for anyone who wants to learn the process, at least on a state-by-state basis, of making the law available. Passing the state laws, however, takes time, but public awareness need not wait. That is why the NFL has taken the lead in promoting concussion education at all levels of sport and in every sport. And before the start of this NFL season, a new concussion awareness poster was developed by a group of medical experts and interested parties working in a great coalition. One of those experts would be Sean Moray, who personally, he and I worked on this poster. I even have it. This is in every locker room in the NFL. It's in a brochure form for every player, and you'll notice Commissioner of the NFL Players Association, the CDC, the Professional Football Athletic Trainers, and the Professional NFL Physician Society all worked together, as they should, to help make sports safer. It was a pleasure and an honor for me to sit next to Sean as we worked on that together. This same group has developed a poster specifically for youth, which I know is part of your bill. And this poster for youth involves all sports. It'll be informational. It will be released shortly, made available at no cost. The NFL has been interested also in other aspects of trying to make concussion safety their business. Other projects with the CDC, USA Football, the American College of Sports Medicine, the National Athletic Trainers Association have been put together to disseminate educational materials for young athletes and their coaches through a variety of different media and educational tools. USA Football, which is the independent, not-for-profit organization that serves as kind of the official youth voice for the NFL, recently has educated 30,000 coaches since April 10th with the concussion education module, as an example. Look for a Put Pride Aside campaign this fall to do just what Sean said, to take this concussion issue and have people report honestly and directly. The NFL continues also to support the science of research for the tragedies like CTE, which are critical for us to understand so that we can try to make sports as safe as possible for as many as possible. In closing, Mr. Chairman, as more has become known about the dangers of head injury, the NFL has become a leader in concussion, not just for the safety of its own players, but for all athletes at all levels of football and in all other sports. And I see them every day. I see young athletes, soccer, basketball, lacrosse, who have been concussed. And those children, those young athletes, can recover and play again, but they must receive proper treatment. I'm proud of what the NFL has done in the professional game, but I'm particularly pleased to share with you the NFL's initiative to educate and inform all sports at all levels about concussions. I think the NFL understands its obligation to continue to lead in this area and to provide a model for all sports. I know that the NFL looks forward to continue to work with this committee and for all other advocates for the benefits of youth athletes everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for your testimony. To Allison and Reverend Brealey and Sean, I just want to say that, and I think Dr. Herring speaking on behalf of Zachary, that your testimony in many ways is a very, very important part of this public discussion, because I think it gives people ownership and license of this debate to change and to rethink the models as a player, as a parent, as a coach, as a team owner. I mean, through the entire athletic community, I think that's very important, and I'm very pleased the way this discussion has developed nationally by working with local school districts, by working with the states, working with the Congress, so that it can be comprehensive. And your stories are all tough, very, very difficult stories to tell. Just as when Sarah joined us about her future and where she was headed in sports and college and the rest of this, and she's had to retract some of that and rethink how to accomplish all of that. But she's doing it, and we're excited about that. But I think for parents and students who are wondering, is this real, is it not, the participants in this debate have really put together a remarkable coalition to bring this home, if you will, in every sense of the word, whether it's an NFL player's family or whether it's a parent with this youth soccer or lacrosse or Pop Warner football or high school sports. I think that's where this discussion really has to take place, and because of the actions of your Senator, Dr. Joya, and what the NFL is doing and what the Mackey White Fund is doing, we see that people have options and places to go for information, and there are places that they respect, that have cachet. And that is worth so much in this kind of discussion when the stakes have turned out to be so very, very high for individuals. I know that Commissioner Goodell has also written every governor. I think every governor, where they don't have a plan in the state yet, I think 40 or 45 governors urging them to take this on, and I hope that that's that's very successful. I'd like to address one part of this, Dr. Herring, if I might, first with you, and that is the third part of the NFL program, and that is that an athlete must be cleared by a licensed healthcare provider trained in the diagnosis and management of concussions before returning to play or practice. And then I'd like Allison, if you might follow up on what you hear here, because I'm not quite sure how you got into the diagnosis when you were trying to think about going back and forth, whether that was a formal process or informal, or whether that's just with respect to your school or not. But first we'll hear why this decision was made on this part of the proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The fact that return to play after concussion is a medical decision is not new news. We've said this for a decade through multiple consensus conferences. It's not fair to make someone be a coach and a medical health care provider or a parent health care provider, and that burden falls upon the health care community to make those decisions. It's our hope through work like yours, where this issue continues to be made more aware and systematically applied across all 50 states, that continued education of health care providers, continued awareness on their part will help them become better providers. Passing the law is the first step. It helps bring awareness. And then, as you know, it's an iterative process. We begin to train all components. You want the parents to know, the athlete to know, the coaches to know, and the healthcare community to know, so someone sounds the alarm. But we do feel, and it just makes sense, that return to play after concussion should be made by a healthcare provider who understands the problem.
Thank you. Allison?
Well, I know Howard County has a very comprehensive system as to how to deal with concussions and suspected concussions. Once you are suspected of having a concussion, you have to go to a healthcare provider, and your parents are notified, and that healthcare provider has to clear you to play or come up with a care plan. And once you are cleared to play by a physician, you must take the computerized test, as I spoke of, and those test results, they consult with Dr. Joya to make sure that the test results are in agreement with the physician's order to return to play.
Thank you. Sean, in this discussion back and forth here, to have this intervention by a health professional to tell a player, in the case of an NFL player or any professional athlete, it's a high-stakes decision. To have that intervention by, hopefully, a neutral medical party, do you think that's helpful? Because the player's got to decide, as you said, am I letting my teammates down? How close is the game? What's our opportunity? And the coach has many of the same concerns, and this question of having independent observation. Do we want to address that?
Sure, and thank you for asking. I think in the NFL, when we suffer concussion, we have to see, and we're removed from play, we have to see both an independent neurological consultant and get cleared by our team medical staff to be able to return to play safely. And I think in the situation with youth athletes, I think it's critical that they see a healthcare provider before they're cleared to return to play. Coaches have to be educated, parents have to be educated, kids have to know and be able to recognize the signs and symptoms of a concussion so they can communicate effectively. And I think it's important that in the NFL, the NFLPA return to play guidelines stipulate that if you demonstrate persistent signs and symptoms of concussion, when you sustain a concussion, that means confusion, headache, vision disturbances, persistent symptoms where you're not recovering from the concussion is deems that you're a danger to yourself and to your team, and you need to be removed from play safely. And that's the role of our healthcare providers, of our team doctors and the team doctors are sports certified. So I think it's important to understand the realities of the NFL and the profession we've chosen as athletes. But I think especially with youth athletes, where their brains are still developing, where their brains are more vulnerable to acute symptomatic concussion because of their brains are more sensitive to those chemical metabolic fluctuations of ions when they sustain a concussion. I mean, when you sustain a concussion, your brain, in effect, it becomes overwhelmed and it shuts down, it becomes quiet. and there's a period of vulnerability where the secondary and further damage can have permanent damage or even catastrophic circumstances. So for high school athletes and youth athletes, it's important to make sure that they're removed when they sustain a concussion.
Thank you. Reverend Brealey, I wanted to get your response to this, but my time is out. I'll come back in the second round, but I wanted, because obviously it appears in Owens that this was almost invisible, to the layperson, or to your son, to yourself and others, and what the medical intervention may or may not have meant. Congressman Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thanks to all the witnesses. Dr. Joy, it's nice to see you here again. Both the physicians, the medical professionals, thank you for your work and for your testimony and input here today. And to Allison Conga-Chang and Dr. Brearley and Mr. Maury, thank you for your testimony and sharing your personal stories. I know there's a lot of pain associated with those stories, and we're very, very glad that you're here today to share those stories. Reverend Brearley, you said that we should be using our offices and other means to promote widespread discussion, and I certainly agree with that, and it seems to me there has been more and more discussion. The work that the NFL has done, the production of the posters, there has been a lot of discussion, and I know that you would certainly have liked to have had more of that discussion earlier. Allison, it seems to me that it was a terrible accident, and the damage was pretty tough for you, but it seems that the system worked like it's supposed to work. You were pulled out, you talked to medical professionals, the trainer said, no, you can't come back, you've got to go back and get cleared again, and the system was there protecting you. Is my understanding correct? You feel like it worked like it was supposed to?
I believe that Howard County system is very comprehensive, and I hope that other schools would have the same system, because in my case, the test definitely caught what was a more serious underlying problem than it appeared to be at first.
And did you know, were you aware of this system before this happened to you?
Well, all athletes are required to complete the baseline test so that there are results to compare to post-concussion. So I think everyone has a general idea of the basic rules and procedures, but it gets, I think, so most people are aware, but it's not that widespread.
You sort of knew it was out there because you had to go take the test.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I got it. Tests will do that to you sometimes. But so there was an awareness on the part of the student body, but it's not something that you probably sat around and talked about all the time. Yeah, that's fine. Nevertheless, the system stepped up and it worked, and it does appear that that's a good model that the rest of the country should look at to adopt. And Dr. Joy, we talked last time you were here, when you have to develop a academic program, which I guess is what we would call that in the case of Allison, there's restrictions on how much homework time and study time and all of that. Remind us again how that's developed. Is that something that you do, that another doctor does, teacher does, you do it together? How does that work one more time? We talked about this last time, but I'd just like to sort of clear that up. How do you get that plan in place and get it implemented so that she has the support that she needs to make that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. And basically, in our clinical examination of the student athlete, we have an understanding of where they're at in their recovery. What can they tolerate? What can they not tolerate? What cognitive functions are impaired? What other physical or even emotional kinds of symptoms are still present? And based on that symptom profile and what is impaired and what they're able to do, we then build that care plan. And as Allison knows, we go through the class schedule. What do you have? When do you have it? How long does it happen? Where can we build the breaks in? Given that it takes, about 45 minutes before your symptoms start to flare, let's build these periods of your academic performance and learning into those 45-minute periods with rest breaks in there. So we construct that and
But,
put that.
excuse me for interrupting, but you're constructing that in discussions, in this case, with Allison.
Yeah.
And so
Allison.
when does the teacher get involved in this? When does the school get involved in this?
So in that, what we do, first of all, in our system, we've also prepared the school nurses, the school psychologists, and the other professionals to support this, the guidance counselors, so that when the care plan, literally we make 4 or 5 copies and the student brings that to the school, the point person at the school, can be a school nurse, could be a guidance counselor, could be a school psychologist, takes that care plan, works with the team. Obviously, Allison is a major member of that, her mom and dad are too, to make sure that that plan is understood and implemented.
Okay, great. Thank you. I see my time has expired. Again, thanks to all the witnesses.
I would like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record of this hearing the letter from the National Football League and the Commissioner, Roger Goodell, on, to the governors. If there's no objection, so ordered. Ms. McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for bringing this hearing. To me, it's extremely important, especially being a background as a nurse. Mr. Bishop from Long Island, my colleague from Long Island, New York, we held a hearing on September 13th and basically had the same kind of hearing that we're having right now with the same professional as a student. And I have to say, one of the things that we heard constantly was a term they used was the warrior mentality, and we actually heard that from, and I want to say thank you to the NFL, because they supplied us with 2 retired football players, Mr. Castor from the New York Jets and Mr. Hall from the San Diego Chargers, that gave us an insight of what their life is like now, from suffering so many concussions to Allison, who was telling us about something recently. My concern with what we're doing, and it's a concern that I'm going to work with Mr. Chairman Miller as we go forward on the healthcare professionals. I think that's very important on how we clarify that. I agree that we need a doctor to be able to diagnose and then work with the school. And I think that when we even have certainly the words healthcare professionals in New York State, which has passed in the Senate, only physicians, physicians' assistants, and nurse practitioners are allowed to diagnose. As a nurse, I can say, I think you might have a concussion. A trainer can say, I think you have a concussion. And I think sometimes when people forget, and gosh, you probably have heard it all the time, it's only a concussion. And that's what we have to try to change around. There's no such thing as only a concussion. A concussion is an injury to the brain, and it's actually opposite. When a young person gets a concussion, it's actually more dangerous at that particular stage than someone that's even older. So we need to tighten up the language, and hopefully I'll be working with Chairman Miller to tighten that language up. I want to go back to the warrior mentality, mainly because from what we found from talking to students that have gotten the concussion, or even the trainers, or even the coach, that basically they will say, oh, you must be all right, because you're back to a fairly normal life, hanging out with your friends, laughing, smiling, so everybody thinks you're just absolutely fine, when that's probably you're still recovering. And I don't know how we deal with it, but going back to the poster that you have, which I think is terrific, but one of the things from our young student that we found out on the poster, they probably won't read that. I'm talking about younger students. It's got to be almost like the poster that was out there years ago with when we were trying to get kids not to take drugs. This is your brain. This is your brain that's fried. So it's got to be colorful so that in the locker room, basically the students will hopefully notice it with also the information that they need. And I was just wondering, with the comments that I just made, if anybody would like to add to that.
Sure. You're absolutely right. The attribution of bravery to this issue is tragically misdirected. And what this will require is a culture shift. And it will not come easily. And I think one of the strengths of your legislation is that it engages everyone. You know, listen, we sometimes find out it's the parent who figures it out. Sometimes it's the athlete themselves, sometimes it's the coach, and sometimes it's the healthcare provider. Everyone is getting better. So as they say, when the crisis is over, the work begins. So changing the culture around this warrior mentality, as you have determined, is essential. And many steps are in place to do that through multiple educational efforts, through work. This is very powerful work that this committee is doing. It will have to go to coaches to reward behavior, such as reporting symptoms. It will, I believe, need to go to legislative efforts so that it's rule-driven. I don't think anyone should expect this to be easily modified, but I will suggest to you, even in the last 2 or 3 years, there's been the first piece, awareness. The second piece now is behavior change in education. That's why this type of work is so important, though. When you make it a national standard, that makes the work for all of us involved in healthcare, or whether it's advocacy for players, neuropsychological testing, it makes it easier for us to push this agenda forward.
Thank you. My time is up. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention, I think the warrior mentality that you speak of, I think a lot of people think that it's a badge of honor to play through a concussion. And I think realistically, it's more, players don't ever want to show that any vulnerabilities or do anything to demonstrate weakness, especially in the NFL locker room. Respect is earned in the NFL locker room. And it's, you know, we have a deep loyalty to our teammates, to our fans, to our owners, to our coaches who stood on the table to give us our jobs. We have a loyalty to sort of complete the mission and finish the game. And I think it's important to recognize that because we deeply care about our teammates, as if in that locker room it's kind of like family. And I think the culture has to shift enough so that players are looking out for each other, and they're telling each other and trying to limit the pressure that we feel to play through injuries. Brain injuries are different. And I think if players can step over to their teammates and say, listen, we've got this, your health is more important, we're going to take care of it. So get yourself right and take time to recover. I think that's the sort of the culture shift that I envision. And I think one of the initiatives that we have with the Mackey White Committee is to try to reach our players and the mentality to change their behavior and change the culture as fast as we can to protect our guys. And this is a poster that we've built with the NFLPA, with Veronica Jenkins and Jason Belzer and Tom DePasso and Tom Mayer and myself. I think there's, and players, and even trainers in the NFL that I counseled. I've done a lot of research and try to speak with coaches and trainers and players to try to address this issue in a very responsible and systematic way. I think we do a disservice to our players if we don't reach a consensus on how to address this issue. But this is a poster that is in every NFL locker room. The poster that Stan showed is a poster that's in every NFL training room to disclose the potential risks. And this poster here was intended to change the culture. It says, I'll read it. It says, work smart and protect your future. Use your head, don't lead with it. And there's pictures here of players in their most vulnerable positions where they're going to have to depend on their team medical staff to take care of them, because when they're injured, those are the people that we trust to make sure that we're looked after and we're protected. At the end, it says, all concussions are not created equally. If you're hurt, don't hide it. Report your head injury to your team medical staff and take time to recover. And I can submit this to Chairman.
Thank you. We'll make that available to the members of the committee. Mr. Platt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to thank you for holding this hearing, as well as my subcommittee chairwoman for the focus on this issue. As I know you're both aware, our colleague Bill Pascrell and I are the sponsors of legislation very similar in the focus, moving through energy and commerce, and delighted to be part of your efforts in partnering with both of you as well as the full committee. Certainly thank all of our witnesses. I apologize in coming from another commitment, didn't hear your testimony, but glad to have your written statements to review. And most importantly, I want to thank you for being here. And as we talk about that cultural shift, that's what you're helping to do, is this dialogue, this information you're sharing today is helping to raise awareness. And it's Mr. Moray, is that correct?
Maury.
Maury.
Yes, sir.
Apologize. Your statements there, as you described the locker room setting and earning respect and completing the mission, loyalty to your teammates, talking as a former NFL player, you could have been sitting there talking as an American soldier or Marine, because Bill Pascrell and I, as co-chairs of the Traumatic Brain Injury Caucus, have focused a lot on TBI and related issues in the military, because that's the signature wound of Iraq and Afghanistan is TBI. And so as you talked, and that cultural shift in the locker room that has to occur, it's what we're also facing on the war front with our soldiers, because they don't want to admit that they can't go back out there and serve their country and watch the backs of their fellow soldiers and Marines. And so we're in a different setting, but the exact same challenge. And it's interesting, your work in the NFL and really helping to lead this effort of a better approach. And we saw it watching the Eagles game last week, and when quarterback took a hit and they kept him out and wasn't released until he went through several checks that yes, he's eligible to return. You certainly would be a great messenger with our military as well, to partner with our military as they try to work at changing the cultural dynamics of the military, dealing with TBI and our courageous men and women on the war front. So, as I said, all of your testimonies bring a different perspective, and a very important one from the medical side, from the athlete side, both at the high school and professional level. And Dr. Breeley, I can't say thank you enough for your willingness and ability to be here. I can only imagine, my boys are 14 and 11, active, and I'm always out there. My 14-year-old is, rappelling from one of our trees in the front yard about a week ago, and I'm standing under him thinking, if he falls, I'm going to do my best. But that worry as a parent, and can't imagine the heartache that you and your family have suffered through and the tragic loss of your son, Owen. Your ability to take that family tragedy, that personal loss, and try to make it a public good through your efforts is remarkable and especially commendable. And so I especially thank you for being here and all that you're doing. And certainly your son Owens continues to live on through your efforts and doing good work by your presence. So God bless you and your family as you continue to advocate to make sure we do better for all the Owens out there in the years ahead. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panel. A very, very important testimony. Dr. Herring, you made reference to the necessity to change the culture in response to questions from Congresswoman McCarthy. And we had this hearing on Long Island last week, and all four of our witnesses had a common strain, and this was this reference to this warrior mentality. And my guess is that the warrior mentality, in part, is innate in the athlete, the wanting to achieve, and in part, it is in the athlete because he or she believes that's what the coaches want. And so what I want to try to focus on is how do we best change the behavior of the coaches, and not so much at the highest levels, at the NFL or even at Division I in colleges, but how do we change it at the Pop Warner League and high schools, and because it seems to me that it built into the coaching profession is this desire to excel, and a desire to excel in the coaching profession is rooted in how good their players are and having the best players in the field and so on. So how do we best deal with the coach's basically dilemma between succeeding and caring for his or her players?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. I think you've hit on the critical issue. Dr. Joy and I can talk and lecture, and we've been all over the place, and you can change some aspects, but the relationship between the coach and the player is essential. Players want to please their coaches, and coaches want to win, and they also want to develop player character. Coaches don't want to hurt their athletes, though. I mean, I take care of a lot of young athletes, and the coaches don't want to hurt them. And part of this, on the coach's part and the athlete's part, is just a lack of awareness. So the CDC has an educational module for coaches. USA Football has an educational module for coaches. In the state of Washington, with the Lystet law, a coach has to pass a concussion education course before he or she can step on the field of play. Those are important steps because information is power. I wouldn't be so naive to think that that alone will do it. I think there has to be a social climate. This is a powerful room. This law is a powerful thing. So you have to, I think that it has to be done by education and legislation. I think empowering parents to understand concussion. An integral part, for example, of the Lystet law is that the parents and the athlete must read and sign an educational sheet about sports concussions. And in my practice now, I have parents bringing that sheet to me saying, I'm worried about my daughter. So we are making on the educational effort, that combined with legislative effort and a change in what's acceptable in sport. If it is demonized, Congressman, not to give players fluids during practice now. That was not always the case. That was viewed as a sign of weakness. That culture has changed. I'm positive, and I've told the Lystet family this, that we can work to change this culture so that it's just as unacceptable, just as socially unacceptable to play someone who is concussed as it is to withhold water during practice or play.
Thank you. Dr. Joy, if I understood Allison correctly, when you were in the process of being cleared or trying to be cleared to return to normal activity, you were both seen and evaluated by a healthcare professional, and then you took this examination. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Dr. Joy, how common is that there's this two-step process, or is this a particularly advanced assessment of the concussed athlete?
Well, in the state of Maryland, this is really the first program, the first county that is doing this. But I always use the example as I'm the team neuropsychologist for the Washington Capitals, and it's the process we've had in place for many, many years that if a player is injured, I hear about it. We institute the full evaluation process. It's a collaboration between the healthcare members. And the idea here in the Howard County system is to have that athletic trainer as that person that is there and who also knows the athlete better than many of us. We have a team neuropsychologist that can oversee that testing process, but we also include that primary care pediatrician who also knows the medical history of that youngster. And it's really that communication. It's a challenge. It's not simple. It's not easy. We've been working on this program now for several years, and it takes some work. But it is still somewhat unique. It is what we need to do nationally, though, and not just the high school level. There needs to be a process at the youth, non-scholastic level as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I would ask unanimous consent that the testimony from Christopher Nowinski, who is from the Boston University Sports Legacy Institute, may be made part of this hearing if there's no objection. I'd also like to recognize the presence of Congressman Pascrell, who is the author of the Concussion Treatment and Care Tools Act, the CONTACT Act, which is in the Energy and Commerce Committee. Welcome to our forum. And then I would recognize Mr. Hare, who is next for questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Only having 5 minutes, there's two issues that I just wanted to bring up. And let me first of all just say I absolutely love sports. My son played soccer, and I'm a big football fan. A lot of this, and I've seen soccer games, and, butting, hitting the ball with your head and the players colliding. One of the things I want to know in terms of preventative things, is there any equipment that would help? That would be my question to you, Allison. And also, Doctor, you brought a football helmet with you, and I'm interested, Mr. Morey, if you, from the NFL's perspective, is there additional equipment that would help keep younger people and professional people safer than we have right now? And then lastly, when I always hear, I'm watching a football game and hear, well, they got their bell rung, and they get up, and I worry very much about, like Hunter Hillmeyer, I know from the Bears is probably going to have to retire because of a series of concussions. I'm wondering from Allison, to your son, to you, Mr. Mori, how many concussions a person can have from the time that they're in high school or junior high school sports to the time if they are fortunate enough to play professional ball. I would wonder, Mr. Mori, do you have any idea how many I'm asking too many questions here. How many concussions you might have sustained in the time before you retired from football? I mean, from all the way up. So part of my concern is, how do we keep people safer so that if they do hit heads, can we avoid this? And what type of equipment is out there, or what do we do? Because I'm not advocating the elimination of any of these things, but I'm wondering what we can do from a safety perspective.
Well, in soccer, I have seen one of my teammates is a goalie, and she sustained a fairly severe concussion a year or so ago, I think. And she now wears a headband. I don't know much about it. I have also seen it in the English Premier League. A goalie wears it, but that's the only 2 instances I've ever seen any type of protective gear used, and I've only seen it with goalies in general.
I think, a lot of helmet manufacturers have made advances to reduce the forces that the brain takes upon contact. And what we're doing right now with the NFLPA, Mackie White, and the NFL Head, Neck, and Spine Committee, we're trying to take the next steps in our helmet studies to try to put helmets on the field using triaxial accelerometers and helmet impact telemetry systems, and use biomechanical engineers to try to correlate that data and try to understand try to understand the biomechanics and how to prevent head injuries better in athletes. And I think it's important to know that even though helmets have improved, no helmet can prevent or reduce the severity of concussion. It's usually the injury itself. I mean, every person is unique and different, and each injury is unique and different as well. And I think the only way we can try to limit the repetitive concussive and subconcussive episodes in the game is by continuing to make progressive rule changes to limit the helmet-to-helmet contact in practice and scrimmages over the course of a player's career and season. And I think we have to manage concussions properly. I think when we talked about the culture in our sports, I think contact sports can teach very valuable lessons about resiliency and humility and the ability to fight through and conquer limitations. I think it's playing in the NFL I've played through a lot of injuries, and I've had my share of concussions, but I think it's taught me a lot of valuable lessons about myself, and it talked about sacrifice, accountability, leadership, teamwork. And I think if we don't want to necessarily change the culture of being able to play contact sports and do it and play physically. Coaches want smart, physical, and mentally tough players and disciplined players. And fans love our sport, and players love the physicality and the brutal nature of our sport. I don't think it's a culture of competing that we have to curb as much as it is the culture of how we manage brain injuries once you sustain a concussion.
Would you guess, Mr. Mori, that a lot of NFL players right now are having concussion problems and aren't saying much? Because of that, wanting to compete and not let the team down that you talked about earlier?
I think that's what we're trying to change. I think up until recently, I think most players thought of concussion as a temporary or transient injury. Just shake it off. We communicated and we just used the words like ding and just got our bell rung. And I think the next steps are trying to understand the injury better through research so that we can determine what the threshold is of what type of injury you can play through and what type of injury you should be removed from play. And I think that's a very difficult thing to gauge. And I think you have to really truly rely on the player being honest and the medical staff being very well trained to recognize the signs and symptoms of concussion so that they can determine when it's safe to return to play. And we have to rely on our team medical staff. And then with kids' cases, they don't have the type of medical staffs and professionals on the sideline like we do. That's why this initiative to protect athletes is so critical with youth players.
Well, I just want to congratulate you on a great career and also what you're doing to help. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Hare. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, and I want to thank all our witnesses for their testimony. We've been dealing with mostly football. The Judiciary Committee has had hearings, Energy and Commerce, and now Education. Other sports equally at risk of concussions? Dr. Herring?
This is not a football issue. It's not a boys' sport issue. This is a contact and collision sport issue. Congressman Scott, the rate of concussion in high school girls soccer is almost as high as it is in boys' football. Actually, in college sports, the rate of concussion in women's soccer is higher than in men's football. So it's very important that we look at this as an issue for safety for all athletes. It's a great question. And to comment one more thing for Mr. Hare, there is no piece of equipment that warranties you will not get a concussion. It does not exist. What does exist, though, what we do know is the best way to manage this is to identify the concussion and have there be complete recovery before return to play.
Thank you. Allison, is Centennial High School a public school?
Yes, it is.
And all public schools in the county have that process?
I believe all schools in Howard County have similar processes to Centennial.
Do you happen to know how much that program costs?
I have
Okay. Dr. Joyer, do you know how much the program costs? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it basically helps set it up. Now, what aspects? We have certified athletic trainers in all the high schools. We have, obviously, an educational program. We have the baseline and post-injury testing aspects. So all those are what I would refer to as the program. And is there a certain part of that you're...
Can you, per student, how much does it cost? $10 a student? $3 million for the county? I mean, some numbers.
Now, I mean, I know that the county pays probably, about $20,000 per athletic trainer. There's 12 high schools. They pay $750 for the test itself. And
for
then
the test per student?
No, for the school.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, per year, basically. And then they pay me some for my consultation input. So I guess if you put all that together, it's probably for the 12 high schools, $400,000 or less. And then I don't know the total number of student athletes in the county, but certainly it's probably 50, 60,000.
Now, somebody mentioned just a concussion, and we've talked about the repetitive concussions. Once you get to a traumatic brain injury, what is the cost of treating a traumatic brain injury? Dr. Herring, just an
Yes,
ideas.
if you have the rare but tragic consequence of taking a concussion and turning into a more moderate or severe brain injury, the cost is exorbitant. The acute medical cost, the life-saving cost, and then the lifelong cost, hundreds of thousands of dollars to save Zach at Harborview Medical Center, the trauma center in Seattle where I work. But that's just the first piece. Home modification, durable medical equipment, ongoing therapy, special accommodations at school.
So somebody with a traumatic brain injury, millions of dollars in costs
Yes.
would not be unusual.
Yes, and
can you compare that cost to the cost of preventing the subsequent concussions that might lead to a traumatic brain injury?
seems to me like money well spent, pennies on the dollar. And I would say that the cost is not only medical. You should look at the cost to the family and the community where that young athlete lives.
Dr. Joy, you want to talk about the cost benefit?
Yeah, I mean, just sort of doing the quick math in my head, thinking about the Howard County program, the number of students that we have, I mean, we could argue that it's probably, less than $25 to $50 per student to administer this program. And of course, the other part of it too is that the certified athletic trainers are treating all injuries, not just concussions, so there's benefit beyond that as well per student. So when you're talking about, $50 or less per student, next to probably the millions of dollars to manage that injury, it's a whole different story. The cost benefit is there.
But if you add up the whole county cost, if you can prevent one traumatic brain injury, the money's well spent.
Yeah. Total cost probably, as I said, $30,000 or $40,000 or less.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Scott, may I?
I'm sorry.
I think it's probably prudent to mention some of the members of our Mackey White Committee Robert Cantu, so actually serves as a senior advisor to the NFL Head, Neck, and Spine Committee, and his co-founder of the Sports Legacy Institute, Chris Nowinski, have implemented and proposed a 7-point plan that's completely free, that coaches and parents and kids can get online, understand the signs and symptoms of concussion, utilize the CDC's information, and it's a 7-step program that's completely free and it's online. And I think it's something that I think every coach should be certified if they're going to design the drills for full contact and be able to oversee some practices and assume the responsibility to care and look after their players. They should be certified to be certified in concussion awareness so that they can protect their athletes.
But Dr. Herring, a lot of the benefit is in preventing the subsequent concussions.
Yes.
And the additive effect. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Sometimes you can't prevent the first one. And as everyone has said, sports is a very good thing. I mean, the most dangerous thing you can do after school is not play sports. Unsupervised activity is where trouble really begins. So you want to make sports safer. And this is not that hard to do. You make it a rule and you make it a culture change and you say, look, even if you can't prevent the first one, you get over the first one, because if you don't, that's where the trouble starts.
Thank you.
Mr. Payne. Let me also thank you, and I think that the awareness has made a big difference. I doubt if several of those quarterbacks would be sitting out this year, Philadelphia and so forth, had not the attention been brought to the fact that you just don't play with concussions anymore. I'd like to certainly commend the NFL. I think that the commissioner is really trying to get this thing on the grips. I think got a lot of changing to do. You know, it was the Vince Lombardi playing out in 0 degrees weather. The old Giants in the '60s with the linemen that were Modeleski and those guys. You could tell my age. I didn't dye my hair gray. But and so everything was just tough. I think that the NCAA is really taking a strong look at this, having maybe now college presidents having as much authority as athletic director or coaches. So there are definitely changes. I do know that you got to get down to Pop Warner, you got to get down to high school. I played ball in high school, injured ankle, not head, but so therefore it kept me really out from doing what I had the ability to do. However, it was interesting. I met a fellow 50 years ago. We played on the same high school team, and the thing that he mentioned was that you remember when we clashed in a scrimmage and I tackled him and he got a concussion. I mean, this was the first thing we talked about 50 years later. But at those days, you just came back in the next week. I mean, it was unbelievable. Coach used to say that, I mean, it was different then.
Yes.
And the tougher you were, and it's not an NFL thing. I never played in the NFL. I just did a little high school, played intramural in college. It's at the even Pop Warner level. So we definitely have to, I think the key thing is to change the culture that you've got to be tough. You got to play injured. You got to go back out there because you can't let the team down or you don't want to look weak. We used to have coaches who said when you're injured, he said, spit on it. That was the answer, So things have changed a lot. I think that we have to continually, though, have the changes. I also had the privilege to coach in high school football for 8 or 9 years and had to just counsel fellas that know you can't play. It's best for your future. And so I think that a lot of we've got to do a lot of education. That I believe is the biggest challenge. But I do have to say that the sports officials in the leagues are really kind of concentrating on let's protect the player. Let me just ask, this is a great, the way that you have a doctor regarding what's being done and as the care that you've had, and let me commend you the other person that we had here was also a female playing soccer. So, like I said, we have to shift it where we feel all these injuries are coming. But maybe someone can answer, what happens to the poor school districts? You know, in my town, I doubt if there are physicians even at a game. I mean, this is tremendous what I hear is happening there. But do you know how that compares to inner city or rural areas where you don't have the luxury to do what you're doing? Anybody do any research on that?
There hasn't been, although we can pretty much guess. I mean, it's you know, kids are unprotected, and again, I think the issue here, whether it's an underserved community or it's an underserved population, which again I would argue is probably many youth sports, whether you're in the highest socioeconomic strata or the lowest, without knowledge, without skill and tools to recognize this problem, everybody is unfortunately in that disadvantaged situation. So we've got to find some solutions to make this a universal issue. And I think, again, by putting these systematic rules in place, then we identify everybody, all kids, at all levels, at all socioeconomic strata.
It's harder. There's no question about it. It is a process that will be improved if there's national standards. It needs funding. I guess that's never said in this room. It needs funding. Wonderful questions from Congressman Scott. I can do a lot of good with a little money, rather than spend a whole lot of money on one unfortunate athlete. So if you want to see this penetrate the rural communities, there has to be education and legislation, and then there has to be capacity to put resources in place, whether it's licensed or certified athletic trainers or working harder with community health care providers to become more knowledgeable. We struggle with this now. It should not deter us from the effort, but this is the work piece. This is the work piece that faces us. Once we get the awareness, we have to work on implementation.
Thank you, Dr. Herring. Ms. Woolsey.
Well, thank you. I'm not going to repeat everything everybody said and ask you, I don't think, the same questions. This has been a great panel. Thank you very much. I'm most worried about parents at the moment, about taking hold of these issues and understanding them, particularly for, well, not for the pro football players. Your parents have already done what they've done and are supportive, but youth athletes. And that's because all of my 4 children were athletes, and one in particular was, well, he was a all-star, all-American college defensive tackle in for small schools for 2 years. And he had to come home after he graduated, take me for a walk and say, "Mother, I'm through with football, get over it." I mean, so you know how supportive we all were and how much we cared. He didn't start football until he was in high school. He has a son who's 10, who's been playing flag football for the last 3 years. He's going to be very good. I mean, he's big, he's good, he's great. I mean, he will be very good. But his dad is very smart. He's his coach in both basketball and football, and he's not going to let him play Pop Warner because this kid would be playing at 10 years old against 13-year-olds because of his size. And I so respect that. And Teddy doesn't care. He loves football. He knows he's going to play sports his whole life, and whether he plays Pop Warner or not doesn't matter. But how many parents make those decisions? We watch it. We see these kids out there, playing at a level that's dangerous at their young age. How do we prevent that? For the most part, one question for parents. The other is, how do we get teachers to understand that after a brain injury, just reading is putting pressure on that brain? So we don't punish these young athletes for needing to rest their brain. So I think that's going to be one of the most difficult things to accomplish, so that they don't become, and then don't get blamed as, trying to cop out, et cetera. Doctor.
If I could address the teacher issue, because I think both Allison and Sarah, are good examples of this. When we go into an unprepared system, the teachers are not aware. When we go into a prepared system, I can't tell you how gratifying it has been over the years to hear the number of families that now come into our clinic and say, the school is doing a great job. The school nurse or the school administrator or the guidance counselor got an email out to the teachers, explained what was going on with that concussion, and they're managing the academic demands very well. Now, we have a long way to go, and we need to do this systematically, but it works. And once teachers understand this, they do jump on board. When we also provide them with some good guidance, and we use these care plans to really specify what are those limits, how much can we handle, and when the administration in the school sets the tone saying, this is how we're handling this, from top to bottom, it then works, but it's a process. And again, I think our new heads-up toolkit for the schools is a great first vehicle for getting that information out there and preparing schools. And I think, again, that's where this legislation really provides that vehicle to take place.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll let everything go on.
Thank you, Mr. Polis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to thank our panel for their terrific stories, in particular some of the personal stories shared, of course, by Ms. Concussion and Dr. Breedley. Those are always difficult to share, but they're powerful, so I appreciate you sharing those stories with us. In the past couple decades in my home state of Colorado, we've had at least 3 high school student athletes who've died from on-the-field brain-related trauma. Most recently, just a couple years ago, when a 15-year-old freshman football player, Jacob Snakebird, collapsed on the field during a football game. And while the Colorado High School Activities Association, which we call CHAZA, requires that coaches now complete concussion education and mandates that schools have return-to-play policies, we don't have any requirements like that for elementary or for middle school. Now, I know that there are legislators in our state that are going to be looking at solutions to that during the next legislative session, but I strongly believe that we need to protect all student athletes from the risk of these injuries in all public schools across the country, which is why I've joined Mr. Bishop and Mr. Miller as a co-sponsor of this very important legislation. I would like to open this up to the panel, but can you share with us why you think it's necessary and why we should pass a federal law on this issue? Not every state has acted. Why not push in each and every state? What are the dangers of not taking any federal action?
I'd like to answer that question. And first of all, I think we need to understand that we need to approach this in as many ways as we possibly can. I think at the federal level, there is an opportunity to give a minimum of guidelines or requirements for student athletes, and then states and school districts should themselves have the opportunity to adopt additional standards. And part of my request that Congress use its offices to promote discussion is because in an era when people are very leery of big government, and in sports where they don't want to be told what to do, I think erring on the side of caution, of giving a baseline from the federal government, giving a baseline of what would be a minimum would be helpful, and then states and school districts themselves can adopt additional precautionary measures, especially since we're all concerned about unfunded mandates.
Have any of you seen it? You've all taken some time on this issue and seen what different districts and schools are doing. Have you observed any best practices where you've sort of looked at a school or district and said, wow, they're doing a really good job in prevention of concussions and making sure that people who have had injuries are not back in the field? Who is kind of really pushing the envelope on this, and how can we then replicate what they're doing nationally?
Well, there's a number of us trying, and at this point, actually in your state and in the Denver area, you have the REAP program, which is something that has been a very important program and a first step. And We are actually collaborating with Colorado here in Maryland and with Oregon, and with Pennsylvania, with some other states to look at what are those best practices, because there are multiple elements, as you mentioned. There's the prevention aspect, there's really the athletic aspect, there's the student and academic aspect, and all of that takes time and people and energy, and we're trying to coordinate all those activities together. I don't think we could say there is one single best practice site right now, but I think in various areas we're all doing some pretty good things, and we're trying to coordinate that now.
And to follow up on that, how do you, what metrics do you use, and how do you sort of figure out what is working and what isn't working? You know, obviously due to small sample size, we know when somebody dies it hasn't worked, but I mean, beyond that, what metrics can we use to show that something's working?
Well, you know, again, you've got those catastrophic things we hope we can minimize. You know, quite honestly, I think that what we're going to see with these programs is we're going to see an increase in the numbers of injuries that are recognized and reported. And in fact, if we don't, we may be doing something wrong, because we know this is an under-recognized problem. But then the question is, to what extent, when, you know, what is the time frame then from identifying the injury to doing the active and appropriate, both medical and academic kind of service delivery? We can begin then to look at what are the times taken to recovery that are supported by these things. So we can begin to build metrics really in terms of that student-athlete's recovery profile, but also the time that the system took to put these things in place.
One thing that I think policymakers would love to rely on to know what works would be helping to figure out what metrics should we be looking at, and how can we figure out what works and what doesn't work,
Yes.
And change what doesn't work.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Kildee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have a similar situation in the military. My son was a captain in the Army Medical Service Corps and received his master's degree at Harvard in healthcare, and now works for the House Armed Services Committee. And this is an increasing injury that comes back from Afghanistan and Iraq. And as a matter of fact, I'm wondering whether the medical people in sports are comparing any notes with the medical people in the military, since there is a similar problem. The question is that, you know, in the military, very often it's the survival of the unit, and here in sports it's more winning the game. One of the things that the Pentagon is discussing right now, for example, is do we give a Purple Heart to someone who has a closed head injury? The criteria for years has been that if you've been injured by enemy action, then you qualify for the Purple Heart. But very often, unless there's blood, they're not sure what to do, and they're still debating that now. But have you had any discussions with those physicians who treat many of the head injuries now that are occurring in Afghanistan and Iraq?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman Kildee. The answer is yes. The newly formed NFL Head, Neck, and Spine Committee is working closely with the DoD. When the commissioner comes to Seattle to host a course on sports concussion, General Shirelli will be there.
Great.
And the military's new program of Take a Knee, using a sports metaphor when they're injured, I think will be helpful. As someone who's taken care of brain injury a long time, I would be less than forthright if I didn't tell you that I hope that the sports concussion piece opens the door to understanding traumatic brain injury more comprehensively. And you're right, it's an invisible injury. But simply because there's not blood doesn't mean there shouldn't be a Purple Heart.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate both your information and your specific response. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Pascrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I just want to begin by referring to what my good friend Mr. Kildee was just talking about, because in the last 3 years there has been movement on the Department of Defense to recognize Purple Hearts and those individuals without blood and without contusion. And we got to get our, beyond that, and are worthy of a Purple Heart and have been denied up until now. So now we're beginning to look at each case individually. The DoD is listening. very carefully. We can learn a lot from what has happened on the military side to help young ladies like Allison. And by the way, Allison, there's somebody in New Jersey, Nikki Papier, I don't know if you've heard of her. She had 10 concussions in sports. She was a basketball player. And we've come, and she went back in and went back in and went back in. You know the story. Now she cannot play any sports, and all she needs is a slight bump on the head. Every concussion, Mr. Chairman, is brain damage. I want everyone in this room to understand that. There is no way to say it otherwise. I'm sorry if I need to be stark, I will be stark. But we've learned so much over the last 6 or 7 years through the fact of the signature injury of Iraq and Afghanistan, which is traumatic brain injury as well as post-traumatic stress disorder, which we're just really getting our hands around. It's been misdiagnosed many, many times. But it helps us with our young kids. It really does, what has happened in the past 5 years. And we can't lose sight of it. I'm glad that the NFL, Mr. Morey and Dr. Herring, I'm glad that the NFL came to recognize this a few years ago, because it didn't beforehand. I've talked to players in the NFL. Many of them were near vegetation. The problem was ignored, swept under the rug. So I'm glad that we are addressing that vigorously. I'm also glad that you support my legislation, of course, but more importantly than that, because we're all in this together. No one has the answer. And I've read what you've said in your boss, Sean, and you are on target. And I know how you've been struggling with this issue, your organization, the Players Association. In the Contact Act, what we did is ask for the professionals to come together, Mr. Chairman, and then decide the protocol and the guidelines, not the Congress of the United States. We're not good at this. We're not good at too many things, and we're certainly not doctors and professionals. So we want them to come together, and we want them to put a protocol together so that protocol and those guidelines can be used, whether kids are in leagues that are scheduled and authorized or smaller leagues, other situations, kids 4, 5, 6 years old. And we're not simply talking about football. Most of the injuries that I've gone over in the past 11 years since I've got involved in this as a co-chair of the Traumatic Brain Injury Caucus are with women. We paid very little attention to this. There is a different structure of the head. I'm talking to the doctor, so I apologize for that. There is different protection in women, perhaps much less protection. And so when we're going to send someone back into the battle, be it soccer, basketball, regardless of what the sport is, we need to take this into consideration, and therefore we must, as Dr. Brealey, as you pointed out, must have a baseline. Now, how do we get to the baseline? The only way you get to the baseline is to have a neuropsychological testing of players before they go on into the field, onto the court. We blew it with our own armed services. We were late to protect them going into battle, and then we basically did a kabuki dance when they come out of battle. Many of them are getting written tests. Think about this. 550,000 were provided neuropsychological tests to go in. Then when they come out, they're given a written test. If I showed you the test, Dr. Joya, you would be embarrassed. And so we're trying to change that mentality. Only 2,500 of the 5,500 that were tested have gotten a real neuropsychological test, because appearances are so critical. The guy, the gal, doesn't complain. No blood, no contusion, no nothing, until later on. So we need that baseline. It is important, it is critical, and I believe it has saved lives, both on the battlefield and on the sports field, and will save many more lives. And that's what I guess we're all about. If we don't save lives, what the heck are we doing here? You know, we're humoring each other. I believe...
Mr. Pascal, may I ask you to conclude?
I will conclude.
Thank you.
I realize I'm here only, you know, at your will. We need to educate. I love the guy can say that to him. Educate, prevent, care for, and recovery, and please get the families involved early. This is critical, both on the battlefield and off. And I thank you, the Speaker. I thank the committee for allowing me to come and say my...
And thank you for your leadership on this issue, Mr. Pascal. Mr. Klein, any concluding comments?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to again thank the witnesses. It's been terrific testimony. You all are working so hard in different aspects of this to spread the word and to develop real tools. So again, thank you very much for sharing your stories. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. I also wish to thank the witnesses for your testimony. Let me give a particular word of thanks to Allison and to Dr. Brealey for sharing your personal stories. It's very powerful for us to hear them. Thank you very much. Without objection, members will have 14 days to submit additional materials or questions for the hearing record. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.